The station hung in the darkness between stars like a forgotten piece of metal. It was old and ugly and filled with creatures from 100 different worlds. Danny Cole had been living there for 6 months, working security for a mining company that paid well and asked few questions. He had not made any friends. He had not tried to. But tonight was different. Tonight he felt the weight of loneliness pressing down on him like a heavy blanket. He looked at the gray walls of his small room and decided he needed to get out. He needed noise and light and the presence of other living beings, even if they were not human. The bar was called the Drifting Nebula. It sat at the far end of the station's commercial district, past the trading posts and the repair shops and the food stalls that sold things Danny could not identify. The sign above the door flickered with a pale blue light. Through the windows, he could see shapes moving in the dim interior. Danny pushed open the door and stepped inside. The smell hit him first. It was a mix of 100 different things, some pleasant and some not. The air was thick and warm. Music played from somewhere, a strange melody that rose and fell in patterns his ears could not quite follow. The bar was crowded. Aliens of every shape and size filled the tables and lined the counter. Some had fur, some had scales, some had too many eyes or too many arms or bodies that bent in ways that made Danny's head hurt if he looked too long. They were drinking and talking and laughing in languages he did not understand. When Danny walked in, the talking stopped. Not all at once. It happened slowly. Like a wave moving through the room, one by one the aliens turned to look at him. A Vortan with gray skin and 4 arms paused with a glass halfway to his mouth. A pair of Kellex traders, their bodies covered in hard black shells, tilted their heads in his direction. A group of small furry creatures in the corner fell silent and stared with wide dark eyes. Danny kept walking. He had learned long ago not to show fear. Fear was weakness, and weakness invited trouble. He found an empty seat at the bar and sat down. The bartender was a tall, thin creature with pale blue skin and no visible mouth. It communicated through a small device attached to its chest that translated its thoughts into words. The device hummed, and a flat mechanical voice asked what Danny wanted to drink. Danny looked at the bottles behind the counter. He recognized none of them. He told the bartender to give him something that would not kill a human. The bartender made a sound that might have been laughter. It poured a dark liquid into a glass and slid it across the counter. Danny picked it up and took a careful sip. It burned going down but left a pleasant warmth in his stomach. He nodded his thanks and turned to look at the room. The conversations had started again, but quieter than before. Danny could feel eyes still watching him. Humans were rare in this part of the galaxy. Earth had only made contact with the greater galactic community about 30 years ago. To most of these aliens, humans were still strange and new and unpredictable. Danny did not mind the attention. He had spent 20 years in the military. He knew how to sit in a room full of potential threats and keep his face calm and his body relaxed. He was on his second drink when the Gorvac approached. The creature was massive. It stood nearly 7 feet tall and was built like a wall of muscle and gray skin. Scars covered its arms and face, old wounds that had healed white against the darker flesh. Its eyes were yellow with vertical pupils, like a cat's eyes, but much larger. The Gorvac stopped next to Danny and looked down at him. Its voice was deep and rough, like stones grinding together. It said its name was Dren. It asked if Danny was human. Danny said yes. Dren made a sound low in his throat. He said he had heard stories about humans. He said humans were supposed to be weak and soft, with no claws and no fangs and no natural weapons of any kind. He asked how such a species had survived long enough to reach the stars. Danny took a sip of his drink. He said humans were tougher than they looked. Dren laughed. It was not a friendly sound. He said he had been a warrior for 300 years. His species, the Gorvacs, had been fighting wars for 10,000 years. They were born to battle. It was in their blood and their bones. He asked Danny what humans knew about war. Danny set his glass down on the counter. He turned on his seat to face the Gorvac directly. The bar had grown quiet again. Other aliens were watching, curious to see what would happen. Danny said humans had been killing each other since before they learned to write. He said war was not something humans had discovered. It was something they had invented over and over again in countless different ways. Dren's yellow eyes narrowed. He asked what Danny meant. Danny said humans had fought with sticks and stones. They had fought with swords and spears. They had fought with guns and bombs and weapons that could turn entire cities into ash in the blink of an eye. They had fought on land and sea and air. They had fought in jungles and deserts and frozen wastelands. They had fought for land and gold and ideas. They had fought because they hated each other, and they had fought because they loved the people they were protecting. He said humans had been at war, somewhere on their planet, for almost every single year of their recorded history. Peace was the exception. War was the rule. The bar was completely silent now. Every alien in the room was listening. Dren stared at Danny for a long moment. Then he pulled out a chair and sat down. Danny held his glass in both hands and stared at the dark liquid inside. The memories were old, but they never faded. He had heard these stories from his grandfather, who had heard them from his father, who had lived through them. The weight of history passed down through generations like a heavy stone. He said it started in a place called Europe. A man had risen to power in a country called Germany. This man believed his people were superior to all others. He believed certain groups of humans were less than human, that they deserved to be wiped from the face of the earth. He built an army and he started taking over other countries one by one. Dren leaned forward. His yellow eyes were focused on Danny with an intensity that might have been frightening if Danny had not seen worse things in his life. Danny continued. He said at first, many countries did nothing. They hoped the man would stop. They hoped peace could be maintained, but the man did not stop. He kept pushing, kept conquering, kept killing. Finally, the world could ignore it no longer. Countries from every corner of the planet chose sides. Some joined the man with the armies. Others stood against him. And then, the fighting began. A Kelix trader named Vrix had moved closer to listen. Her body was covered in a hard black shell that gleamed in the bar's dim light. She had large compound eyes that reflected Danny's face back at him in 1,000 tiny pieces. She asked how bad the fighting was. Danny said it was worse than anything the world had ever seen. He said battles were fought on every continent except one. Ships sank in every ocean. Planes filled the skies like angry birds. Cities burned. Whole countries were reduced to rubble. He told them about a place called Stalingrad, where two armies had fought for months in the ruins of a frozen city. Soldiers had killed each other in the streets, in the buildings, in the sewers beneath the ground. The cold killed as many as the bullets. Men froze to death in their boots. They starved. They ate rats and leather and worse things. And still they fought, day after day, week after week, until the snow was red with blood. The young Vorthon named Sella had left her table and was now standing near Dren. She had 4 arms like all her species and 4 eyes that blinked in an uneven pattern. Her gray skin had gone pale. She asked why they did not stop. She asked why they did not surrender. Danny said surrendering meant death. The man who led the enemy army did not take prisoners. He sent them to camps where they were worked until they died or killed outright. Millions of people were murdered in those camps. Not soldiers, but ordinary people, men and women and children. They were killed because of their religion, their race, their beliefs. They were killed because they were different. The bar had grown so quiet that Danny could hear the hum of the station's engines through the walls. Every alien in the room was frozen in place, drinks forgotten, conversations abandoned. Danny said humans had a word for what happened in those camps. They called it genocide, the deliberate killing of an entire group of people. Vrix made a clicking sound with her mandibles. She asked how many died in these camps. Danny said 6 million, just in the camps. That did not count the soldiers who died in battle, or the civilians who died in the bombing, or the people who starved or froze or were caught in the crossfire. He told them about a beach called Normandy. He said the countries fighting against the evil man needed to take back the land he had stolen. To do that, they had to cross a sea and land on a beach that was heavily defended. The enemy had guns in concrete bunkers. They had barbed wire and mines and soldiers waiting in trenches. The men who landed on that beach knew what was waiting for them. They knew many of them would die before they even reached the sand. They went anyway. Danny described the morning of the invasion. Thousands of ships crossing the water in the gray light before dawn. Young men packed into small boats, many of them sick from the rough waves, all of them afraid. The boats hit the beach and the doors dropped, and the bullets started flying. He said men died before they could take a single step. They fell in the water and drowned under the weight of their equipment. They fell on the sand and did not get up. The ones behind them kept coming. They stepped over the bodies of their friends, and they kept moving forward. Dren asked why. His voice was quiet now, all the mockery gone. He asked why they would run into certain death. Danny said they did it because someone had to. They did it because the people back home were counting on them. They did it because giving up meant letting evil win. He told them about a man named Johnny, a farm boy from a small town who had never been more than 50 miles from his home before the war. Johnny landed on that beach and watched his best friend die in the first 30 seconds. He kept going. He made it to the seawall, and he fought for 8 hours straight. When the day was over, he was one of the few from his boat still alive. Johnny did not think he was brave. He said he was just too scared to stop moving. Danny told them about the nurses who worked in tents just behind the front lines. They operated on wounded men while bombs fell around them. They held the hands of dying soldiers and told them everything would be okay, even when they knew it was a lie. Many of them were young women, barely out of their teens, seeing horrors that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. He told them about the pilots who flew missions knowing they had a 1 in 4 chance of coming back. He told them about the sailors who went down with their ships and the soldiers who threw themselves on grenades to save their friends. Sella asked if humans were born without the ability to feel fear. Danny laughed, but there was no humor in it. He said humans felt fear just like anyone else. They felt it in their stomachs and their chests and their shaking hands, but they had learned to act despite the fear. They had learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision that something else was more important. He said the war lasted 6 years. When it was finally over, the world counted its dead. The number was somewhere between 70 and 85 million. Dren repeated the number slowly, as if he could not believe what he was hearing. Danny nodded. He said that number included soldiers from both sides, civilians caught in the fighting, victims of the camps, people who starved or died of disease. It was the deadliest conflict in human. Danny raised his hand, and the bartender brought him another drink. He needed it for what came next. The stories he had told so far were heavy, but they were history. What he was about to tell them was something darker, something that still hung over humanity like a shadow that would never lift. He asked if any of them knew what an atom was. A few of the aliens nodded. Vrix said atoms were the tiny pieces that made up all matter. Every solid thing, every liquid, every gas was built from atoms too small to see. Danny said that was right. He said humans had discovered that if you split certain atoms apart in just the right way, you released an enormous amount of energy. More energy than anything humans had ever seen before. And humans, being humans, had immediately figured out how to turn that discovery into a weapon. He told them about a project so secret that most of the people working on it did not know what they were building. Scientists from all over the world had come together in hidden places to create something new. They called it the atomic bomb. Sella asked what an atomic bomb could do. Danny said one bomb, small enough to fit inside a single aircraft, could destroy an entire city. Not damage it, not burn parts of it. Destroy it completely in less than a second. The silence in the bar was absolute. Danny told them about a city called Hiroshima. It was a warm morning in August. People were going to work and children were going to school. The sky was clear and blue. No one knew what was coming. A single plane flew overhead. It dropped a single bomb. And then there was a flash of light brighter than the sun. He said the center of the explosion was hotter than the surface of a star. Buildings did not burn. They simply ceased to exist. People did not die. They were vaporized, turned to shadows burned into concrete. The blast wave flattened everything for miles. The fires that followed consumed what was left. 80,000 people died instantly. Tens of thousands more would die in the days and weeks that followed from burns and radiation sickness. Their bodies broke down from the inside. Their hair fell out. Their skin peeled away. They bled from places people should not bleed from. Dren's massive hands were clenched into fists on the table. He asked why humans would create such a thing. Danny said humans created it because they were afraid someone else would create it first. They used it because they believed it would end the war faster and save lives in the long run. He said he was not defending the decision. He was just explaining it. 3 days after Hiroshima, humans dropped a second bomb on a city called Nagasaki. Another flash of light. Another city destroyed. Another 80,000 dead. The war ended shortly after that. Danny said humans had looked at what they had done and felt something they had never felt before. They had always known they were capable of terrible things, but now they knew they were capable of ending everything. Every city, every country, every person on their planet. And instead of stepping back from that edge, humans had spent the next 50 years building more bombs. He told them about the Cold War. Two great powers, the United States and the Soviet Union, had divided the world between them. They did not fight each other directly. Instead, they built weapons, thousands of them, tens of thousands, enough nuclear bombs to destroy the world many times over. Vrix asked why. Her compound eyes reflected the light like broken mirrors. She asked what possible reason there could be for building so many weapons. Danny said each side was afraid of the other. They believed that if they had more bombs, the other side would not dare attack them. They called it mutually assured destruction. If one side launched their weapons, the other side would launch theirs. Everyone would die. No one would win. He said entire generations of humans had grown up under that shadow. Children had practiced hiding under their desks at school, as if that would protect them from a nuclear blast. Families had built shelters in their backyards. People had gone to sleep every night knowing that tomorrow might be the last day of human civilization. Sella wrapped her 4 arms around herself. She asked how humans had lived with that fear. Danny said humans were good at living with fear. They had been doing it since they first climbed down from the trees and realized the darkness was full of things that wanted to eat them. Fear was familiar. Fear was almost comfortable. He told them about moments when the world had come close to ending. There was a time when one of the great powers had placed weapons on an island near the other. For 13 days, the two sides had stared at each other across the water. Fingers hovering over buttons that would end everything. He told them about a night when one side's computers had shown incoming missiles. A single officer had looked at the screens and seen the end of the world. He had minutes to decide whether to launch a counterattack. If he did, billions would die. If he did not, and the attack was real, his own country would be destroyed. The officer had looked at the data and decided something was wrong. He had trusted his instincts over his machines. He had not pushed the button. The screens had been wrong. There were no missiles. A computer error had almost ended human civilization. Danny said that officer's name was not famous. Most humans did not even know who he was. But he had saved the world by doing nothing, by having the courage to wait and think when everything was telling him to act. He told them about other close calls, broken arrows they called them, accidents with nuclear weapons, bombs that had fallen from planes, submarines that had almost launched their missiles. Time after time, humanity had stepped up to the edge of the abyss and somehow stepped back again. A new voice cut through the silence of the bar. It was deep and rough, and it came from behind Danny. He turned to see another Gorvac standing there. This one was female, taller than Dren by at least half a foot. Her gray skin was marked with scars that told stories of 100 battles. One of her eyes was clouded white, blinded by some old wound. The other eye was fixed on Danny with an intensity that made him straighten in his seat. She introduced herself as Kara. She said she had been listening to his stories about ancient wars and terrible weapons. She said history was interesting, but she wanted to know something more personal. She asked if Danny had ever fought in a war himself. Danny looked at her for a long moment. The bar had grown even quieter, if that was possible. He could feel the weight of every eye in the room pressing down on him. He said yes. He said he had served for 20 years in his country's military. He had been deployed to combat zones 4 times. He had seen things that still visited him in his dreams. Kara pulled out a chair and sat down across from him, next to Dren. She said she wanted to hear about that. Not the big picture, not the numbers and the politics. She wanted to hear what it was like to be a human soldier in a human war. Danny was quiet for a while. These were not stories he told often. They lived in a part of his mind that he usually kept locked away. But something about this night, about this bar full of aliens who were trying so hard to understand, made him want to open that door. He said he had fought in a desert. The sand was everywhere, fine as powder, and it got into everything. Your weapons, your food, your eyes and ears and lungs. The heat during the day could kill you if you were not careful. The nights were cold enough to make your bones ache. He told them about a city called Fallujah. It had been taken over by enemy forces who had dug in deep. Danny and his unit had been sent to take it back, building by building, street by street. He described what it was like to clear a building. You kicked open a door and you had less than a second to decide if the person inside was a threat. Sometimes it was a fighter with a weapon. Sometimes it was a family hiding in a corner, terrified. Sometimes it was both, a fighter using civilians as shields. He said the stress of those decisions never went away. Every door was a question with no good answer. Every shadow might be hiding someone who wanted to kill you. Sella asked how Danny had handled that fear. Danny said he had not handled it well. Nobody did. You pushed it down, and you kept moving because stopping meant dying. You told jokes that were not funny, and you checked your equipment 100 times, and you did not sleep because sleep meant dreams. He told them about a soldier named Pete. Pete was young, barely 22, with a face that still looked like a boy's. He had joined the military to pay for college, never expecting to end up in a war zone. During one engagement, their unit had come under heavy fire. A soldier named Rico had been hit and was lying in the open, bleeding out. The enemy had them pinned down. No one could reach him. Pete had not waited for orders. He had run out into the bullets and grabbed Rico under the arms. He had dragged him back while rounds kicked up dirt all around them. Pete took 2 bullets himself, one in the leg and one in the shoulder, but he did not stop. He kept pulling Rico until they reached cover. The medic said Rico would have died in another 2 minutes. Pete had saved his life. Dren asked if Pete was considered a great warrior among humans. Danny shook his head. He said Pete never saw himself that way. When people called him a hero, he got uncomfortable and changed the subject. He said he was just doing what anyone would have done. He said leaving Rico behind was not something he could have lived with. Pete walked with a limp for the rest of his life. He never complained about it. Danny told them about a medic named Katie. She was small, barely 5 feet tall, with red hair and freckles and a voice that could make a dying man believe he was going to be okay. During one of the worst days of the deployment, their forward base had been attacked. Mortars and rockets had rained down for hours. The wounded kept coming, one after another, carried in by their friends or crawling in on their own. Katie had worked for 12 hours without stopping. Her hands were covered in blood up to her elbows. Her eyes were red from dust and exhaustion. She had run out of some supplies and had to improvise with what she had. She saved 17 lives that day, 17 people who would have died without her. When the attack finally stopped and the base fell quiet, someone found Katie asleep on the floor of the medical tent. She had collapsed right there among the wounded, too tired to take another step. Kara asked what drove humans to do such things for each other. Danny said it was hard to explain to someone who had not been there. He said war created bonds between people that nothing else could match. You lived with the same people day and night. You ate together and slept in the same dirt and faced death together. You saw each other at your worst and your best. After a while, he said, you stopped fighting for your country or your flag or any of the big ideas they told you about in training. You fought for the person next to you. You fought because they were your family in every way that mattered. He said there was a saying among human soldiers, no one gets left behind. It was not just words, it was a promise that went deeper than anything. If you went down, your brothers and sisters would come for you. They would crawl through fire to bring you home. Danny told them about the day he almost died. His convoy had been hit by an ambush, his vehicle had been destroyed by an explosion, and he had been thrown into a ditch, bleeding from wounds he could not see. He had lain there in the dirt, watching the sky spin above him, certain that this was the end. He had thought about his mother and his sister, and the dog he had left behind when he deployed. Then hands had grabbed him. His squad mates had pulled him out of that ditch while bullets flew around them. They had carried him to safety and kept pressure on his wounds until the medics arrived. He said he owed his life to people whose names most of the galaxy would never know. Ordinary humans who had done extraordinary things because that was what you did for your own. Vrix asked if human soldiers were trained to be so loyal. Danny said training was part of it, but not all of it. He said humans had been protecting their tribes since before they were fully human. It was built into their blood, the instinct to stand between danger and the people they cared about. He said human soldiers carried that instinct into battle. They might be scared, might be hurt, might be exhausted beyond all reason, but if one of their own was in trouble, they would move heaven and earth to help them. The night had grown late. The drifting nebula's lights had dimmed automatically, casting long shadows across the bar. Most of the patrons who had been there when Danny arrived were still there, though none of them had spoken in a long time. They sat in silence, processing everything they had heard. Danny felt tired. Not the physical exhaustion of a hard day, but something deeper. Telling these stories had opened old wounds, brought back memories he usually kept buried. But he did not regret it. These aliens had wanted to understand humanity, and now they understood a little better. Sella broke the silence. Her voice was soft, almost afraid. She asked if humans would bring their wars to the stars. She asked if the other species of the galaxy should be afraid. Danny looked at her for a long moment. It was an honest question, and it deserved an honest answer. He said humans hoped not. He said they had spent thousands of years learning the cost of war. They had paid for that knowledge with blood and suffering and generations of grief. They had no desire to teach those lessons to anyone else. He told them about the monuments back on Earth. There was a wall in a city called Washington, black stone carved with the names of soldiers who had died in a war that many humans still did not fully understand. People came there to trace the names of their fathers and brothers and sons with their fingers. They left flowers and letters and small tokens of remembrance. There was a tomb there, too, guarded day and night by soldiers who stood watch in all weather. Rain or snow or burning sun, someone was always there, honoring the unknown dead. The soldiers who guarded that tomb took their duty more seriously than almost anything else in their lives. Danny said humans remembered their dead, because forgetting would be the greatest betrayal. Every name on every wall, every grave in every cemetery, represented a person who had given everything. They had hopes and fears and people who loved them. They had futures that were cut short. Humans carried that weight. It was heavy, but they would not put it down. Dren spoke up. His rough voice had lost its earlier edge. He asked what humans wanted from the galactic community. He asked why they had reached out to the stars. Danny said humans wanted what everyone wanted: safety for their families, opportunity for their children, the chance to explore and learn and grow. They wanted to meet new species and understand different ways of thinking. He said humans did not want to conquer anyone. They had spent enough time conquering each other. The scars of empire were written across their history, and they had learned how much damage that kind of thinking could do. But he also said that humans would not stand by if they saw innocent people being hurt. He said if someone threatened the weak or tried to enslave the defenseless, humans would respond. It was built into their nature, the same instinct that made soldiers run into gunfire to save their friends. He looked around the bar at all the different faces watching him. He said humans were not perfect. They had done terrible things to each other and to their own world. They had made mistakes that cost millions of lives. They were still learning, still growing, still trying to be better than they were, but they had also done beautiful things. They had created art and music that could make you cry. They had built machines that let them walk on their moon. They had looked at diseases that killed millions and refused to accept death as the answer. They had reached out across the vast emptiness of space because they could not bear to be alone. He said humans were a contradiction. They were capable of great cruelty and great kindness, sometimes in the same breath. They could hate with a passion that burned worlds and love with a depth that moved mountains. Kara asked what humans would do if the galaxy turned against them. Her clouded eyes seemed to see right through him. She asked what would happen if all the other species decided humans were too dangerous to exist. Danny was quiet for a long moment. Then he said humans would do what they had always done. They would survive. He said humans had been facing extinction since the beginning. Ice ages and plagues and wars that killed half their population. Every time someone had said humanity was finished. Every time humanity had refused to die. He said if the galaxy came for them, humans would fight. Not because they wanted to, but because they did not know how to do anything else. They would fight with everything they had, every weapon and every trick and every last breath. But he said he hoped it would never come to that. He said humans wanted peace. Real peace. Not just the absence of war, but actual understanding between species. They wanted to sit in bars like this one and share stories and learn from each other. He finished his drink and set the empty glass on the counter. The sound was loud in the silent room. He said he had taken enough of their time. He had told them about human wars, about the best and worst of his species. He hoped they understood a little better now. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small handful of credits. He placed them on the counter, enough to cover his drinks and then some. Then he stood up from his seat. No one else moved. Dren rose slowly to his feet. The massive Gorvak looked down at Danny with an expression that was hard to read. Then he reached out and placed a heavy hand on Danny's shoulder. He said his people had been warriors for 10,000 years. They had fought enemies across 100 star systems. They had seen species rise and fall. They thought they understood what it meant to be strong. He said he had been wrong. He said humans had taught him something tonight. Strength was not just about weapons or armies or the ability to destroy. Strength was about endurance. It was about getting knocked down and standing back up. It was about carrying impossible burdens and refusing to quit. He said humans were not weak. They were the strongest species he had ever encountered. Kara stood as well. She said Dren spoke for her too. She said she had met many warriors in her long life, but none like the humans Danny had described. People who ran toward danger instead of away from it. People who died for strangers because it was the right thing to do. She said if she ever faced battle again, she would be honored to stand beside a human. One by one, the other aliens in the bar stood. Vrix, Sella, the small furry creatures in the corner, the bartender with no mouth. All of them rose to their feet in a gesture of respect that needed no translation. Danny looked around at them all. His throat felt tight. He had not expected this. He had just been telling stories, trying to explain where he came from. He had not meant to earn their admiration. He nodded once, a simple gesture of acknowledgement. Then he turned and walked toward the door. Behind him, the bar remained silent. Every alien watched as the human made his way through the tables and chairs. He did not look back. He did not need to. He pushed open the door and stepped out into the station's artificial night. The corridor was empty and quiet. Somewhere in the distance, a machine hummed its endless song. Danny stood there for a moment, breathing the recycled air, feeling the weight of the stories he had told pressing down on his shoulders. It was a familiar weight. He had carried it for years. He started walking, his footsteps echoing off the metal walls. He was just one human, far from home, surrounded by an infinite universe he barely understood. But he was not afraid. Humans had faced the darkness before. They had stared into the abyss and found the strength to keep going. Whatever challenges the galaxy held, whatever enemies might rise against them, humanity would face them the same way they had faced everything else. Together, stubborn, unbroken. Danny disappeared around a corner, leaving the drifting nebula behind. But the aliens inside would not forget him. They would not forget the stories he had told, or the truth those stories revealed. Humans were small and soft, and lived such short lives. But they were not to be underestimated. They were not to be taken lightly. They were humanity, and they did not know how to give up. Kara was quiet for a long moment. Then she said her people had a tradition of honoring their greatest warriors with songs that were sung for generations. She asked if humans did the same. Danny nodded slowly. He said humans remembered their soldiers in many ways. They built monuments and walls covered in names. They held ceremonies and parades. They told stories like the ones he was telling now, but he said the greatest honor was simpler than that. It was in the way veterans looked at each other when they passed on the street. A nod, a small gesture of recognition. It was in the way they gathered to remember fallen friends on certain days of the year. He said humans carried their dead with them always, not as a burden, but as a reminder of what mattered most. The bar was completely still. Danny could hear his own heartbeat in the silence. He wondered if he had said too much, revealed too much of the human soul to these strangers from other worlds, but when he looked around at their faces, he did not see judgment or fear. He saw understanding. Dren shook his massive head. He said his people had fought wars for 10,000 years, but they had never invented anything like what Danny was describing. He asked why humans would create weapons they could not use without destroying themselves. Danny said humans asked themselves that question all the time. He said there was no good answer. Humans were brilliant and stupid, creative and destructive, all at the same time. They could split the atom and walk on their moon, but they could not stop pointing weapons at each other. He said the Cold War had ended eventually. One of the great powers had collapsed from within. The threat of immediate destruction had faded, but the weapons were still there. Thousands of them, sitting in silos and submarines, waiting. Vrix asked if humans still lived with that fear. Danny said yes. He said humans had learned to push it to the back of their minds, to go about their daily lives and not think about the bombs. But the fear was always there, quiet and patient, waiting to be remembered. He said humans had looked into the darkness and seen their own reflection. They had seen what they were capable of, and they had not looked away. They had kept living, kept building, kept hoping that tomorrow would be better than today. That, he said, was what made humans different. Not their strength or their weapons or their technology. Their stubborn refusal to give up, even when giving up would be easier. The aliens in the bar stared at him with expressions he could not read. Some looked afraid, some looked confused. A few looked at him with something that might have been respect. Danny took another drink and waited for the next question. History. And humans had done it with technology that these aliens would consider primitive. No energy shields, no plasma weapons. No faster-than-light travel, just metal and fire and the will to keep fighting. Vrix asked what happened after the war ended. Danny finished his drink and set the empty glass on the counter. He said humans promised themselves it would never happen again. They built organizations to promote peace. They tried to learn from their mistakes. But he said humans also learned something else from that war. They learned how to split the atom. They learned how to build weapons that made everything that came before look like toys. He said humans learned how to destroy themselves completely, and they almost did exactly that. The aliens stared at him in silence, waiting to hear what came next. Juan across from him. He called to the bartender for 2 more drinks. He told Danny to keep talking. He said he wanted to hear more about human wars. Danny looked around the room at all the alien faces watching him. He saw curiosity in some eyes and doubt in others. He saw a few that looked almost afraid. He picked up his fresh drink and took a long, slow sip. Then he began to tell them about a war that had consumed his entire world, a war that had killed more people than most of these aliens could imagine. He began to tell them about the Second World War,